Human behavior is driven by an invisible engine. Every decision, memory, and perception happens out of sight, locked inside the skull. The paradox of cognitive psychology is the attempt to take these hidden processes and subject them to rigorous, quantifiable scientific measurement. For the first half of the 20th century, the dominant school of thought actively rejected this goal. Figures like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner built the foundation of behaviorism on a strict rule. Psychology could only be a science if it restricted itself to what could be physically observed. They measured the stimulus applied to an organism and the resulting physical response. This flowchart illustrates their approach. Notice the middle step. Behaviorists treated the mind as a black box. They argued that attempting to measure internal processes like thought, memory, and reasoning was inherently unscientific because those functions could not be independently verified by an observer. That strict limitation began to fracture in the late 1950s. Researchers grew frustrated with models that ignored complex human traits like problem-solving and reasoning. A major catalyst for what became known as the cognitive revolution was linguist Noam Chomsky, whose 1959 critique of behaviorism demonstrated that conditioning alone could not explain how children acquire the complex grammar of human language. At the same time, practical pressures demanded a new approach. During World War II, the military needed to understand human performance limits, specifically how soldiers processed information and maintained attention while operating complex radar technology under duress. Researchers like Donald Broadbent utilized concepts from information theory to map these limits, requiring an active model of internal attention. This second model represents the formal shift. Cognitive psychology asserts that the internal environment is not an impenetrable void, but a series of measurable scientific events. These internal steps are called mediational processes. They are the active mental events, perception, memory retrieval, language comprehension, and decision-making that bridge the gap between receiving an environmental input and producing an external output. To survive and evolve as a relevant science, psychology had to shift its focus. Treating humans as simple stimulus-response machines was no longer viable. The discipline had to understand the engine driving the reflexes. In the mid-20th century, the rise of computer science and artificial intelligence pioneers, like Alan Newell and Herbert Simon, provided a new structural language for psychology. They introduced the computational metaphor. This is the premise that the human brain processes information according to the same logic as a complex computing system. Both systems distinguish between an active central processor with limited attention capacity and a massive long-term storage bank. The physical hardware is obviously different, biological nervous tissue versus silicon chips. However, the operational logic is analogous. Both take in raw data, transform it, reduce or elaborate on it, store it, and retrieve it when needed to execute a goal. This metaphor gave cognitive psychologists a concrete vocabulary. Instead of abstract philosophy, they had a schematic approach to draw verifiable functional blueprints of human thought. With the computational metaphor established, the next task was mapping these mediational processes structurally, turning abstract theories of memory into formalized flowcharts. This illustrates Atkinson and Shiffrin's 1968 multi-store model. First, environmental input enters sensory memory and decays rapidly unless it clears the attention bottleneck. Focused stimuli pass to short-term memory. Here, data must be kept active through maintenance rehearsal, or it decays. For permanent storage, the system requires elaborate rehearsal. This commits data to long-term memory, creating a massive archived record that can be retrieved later. But the multi-store model clearly maps the pathways data travels, but it treats the mind like a passive hard drive. It fails to explain how we actively interpret, manipulate, and sometimes distort that input. To address how we manipulate input, Ulrich Neisser proposed a new framework in 1967. This graphic breaks down the two directions. On the left is bottom-up processing, initiated at the sense organs and flowing upward, assembling raw sensory information. On the right is top-down processing, where the brain generates expectations that flow downward to interpret data. This top-down interpretation relies on schemas. First proposed by psychologists like Frederick Bartlett and John Piaget, schemas are mental patterns derived from past experiences. They act as templates, forcing new, unfamiliar perceptual input to fit into our established view of the world. The mind acts as a prediction engine. We do not experience the physical world exactly as it is. We experience a highly edited composite built from the raw data our senses collect and the historical expectations our schemas impose. Try identifying this image using only bottom-up processing. Relying solely on the raw physical data, the random black and white blobs, your senses fail to find meaning. Now apply top-down processing. Look for a Dalmatian sniffing the ground. Your schema adds meaning, snapping it into focus. Schemas use adjacent context to alter perception. This image shows a vertical column of numbers, 12, 13, and 14. If we place that exact same middle shape between the letters A and C, your top-down processing forces you to read it as B. The stimulus doesn't change, but your expectation does. These top-down expectations are so powerful they can blind us to raw Veda errors. Look at this block of text. Most of the words are severely misspelled, yet you can read it without hesitation. Your mind recognizes whole words as complete structural patterns, auto-correcting the chaotic sensory input on the fly. This brings us to a direct collision, the Stroop effect. Try to quickly say aloud the color of the ink for each word on this grid, ignoring the text itself. You will likely experience a delay. Reading words is automatic and fast. Identifying the ink color is slower. The two signals cause internal interference. Every second of human perception is a fragile, high-speed negotiation between the objective data our senses collect and the subjective assumptions our schemas impose. This reveals a significant methodological dilemma. If human cognition is a subjective blend of hidden schemas and raw sensory data, how can psychologists objectively verify their theories? Cognitive psychology abandons reliance on any single testing method, triangulating data across 4 distinct scientific approaches. Experimental psychology uses controlled behavioral lab testing, while cognitive neuroscience utilizes tools like fMRI to track actual blood flow and electrical activity during specific tasks. These are reinforced by cognitive neuropsychology, which studies individuals with specific brain injuries to locate cognitive functions, and computer modeling, which tests theories by simulating human cognitive architecture with software code. Despite this robust framework, the field faces a persistent vulnerability, popularized by Ulrich Neisser in the 1970s, the crisis of ecological validity. The very controls needed to isolate variables in a laboratory, like forcing subjects to memorize random, meaningless lists of words, create a sterile environment. It strips away the natural cultural context and the very schemas that drive real human behavior. Researchers Kvavilashvili and Ellis highlighted this tension, arguing that generalizability to the real world is far more critical than an experiment simply looking natural. An intricate memory model is useless if it cannot predict how a student actually studies a textbook in a dorm room. Cognitive science constantly walks a tightrope. It must balance the rigorous, sterile isolation of variables in a lab setting against the chaotic, schema-driven reality of everyday human life. Despite these methodological hurdles, the cognitive architecture mapped over the last 70 years has moved far beyond the laboratory. It now serves as the foundational operating system for multiple modern industries. In technology, the computational models of human cognition directly inspired artificial intelligence. Those blueprints provided the basis for neural networks, deep learning, and natural language processing. In clinical healthcare, understanding how schemas distort reality led to cognitive behavioral therapy. This practice actively helps patients map and rewire negative thought patterns to manage anxiety, depression, and even chronic pain. It reconstructs how the legal system handles the fragile nature of eyewitness testimony. In the corporate world, cognitive ergonomics reshapes everything from software interfaces to airplane cockpits to prevent critical attention overload. In education, utilizing principles like cognitive load management and spaced repetition has improved how academic curricula are designed and delivered. The cognitive revolution provided the functional schematics to engineer more capable machines, build safer infrastructure, and optimize the ways humans learn and heal. It moved beyond the observation of behavior to the engineering of the mind.